Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Breastfeeding. I'm Barbara Robertson, private practice IBCLC and owner of LactaLearning Incorporated. And I'm here joined by Nancy Moorbacher, one of the founders of LactaLearning as well, and private practice. Well, you're not really private practice anymore, but
No.
you have done everything. And I'm the author of Breastfeeding Answers, second edition. And
Mhm.
so we today are going to be talking about nursing and emergencies. So when I say this, Nancy, what does that mean to you, nursing and emergencies?
That means nursing in a situation where life has gone through a tremendous upheaval due to something such as it could be a weather upheaval, which we're seeing all around the world today with climate change, hurricanes, floods, droughts. It could be a man-made upheaval, such as war. We're seeing a lot of that as well. So anything like that that might be having a major effect on people that disrupts their lives.
Often requires them to move and leave their
Mhm.
home and go somewhere else. And
Mhm.
as you say, Nancy, these are increasing in frequency.
Mhm.
And so some people can be like, oh, I don't need to know about this. But honestly, I think we should be aware of
Yeah.
this, of the kind of uh, trauma and tragedy that these situations bring to families.
Well, as we record this, Asheville, North Carolina is recovering
Mhm.
from being hit by Hurricane Helene, which, and some towns around there were just completely wiped out. And that is not a part of the country that you expect that you're
Right.
going to see that kind of emergency.
And in fact, their water system was completely disrupted, which is
Mhm.
a huge thing because to get that back in operation takes a
Mhm.
lot of time and effort. And
Right.
so here in the United States, we remember Hurricane Katrina and how long it took us to bounce back from that. But
Right.
in some areas of the world, there's less resources, less help. And so it can take months or maybe even years for a society to get back together. So, what does this mean for us? Well, when we have a natural disaster, protecting and promoting breastfeeding, chest feeding is critical. So talk about that for a second. Why?
Well, what happens in an emergency is that often things are disrupted that are necessary for good health.
Hmm.
For example, you may not have easy access to food or water, which is
Right.
what's happening right now in Asheville. You may not have access to refrigeration. So if, let's say, a baby's being formula fed, they might have a shortage of formula. They might not be able to refrigerate it. They might not have access to methods of heating things and making them sanitized and safe. And they may not they also may not have good access to medical care.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of factors that can reduce, good health in a situation like that.
Right. And we know that breast milk is optimal nutrition for an infant. And, it's been said that in the first 6 months of life, if you are nursed, you don't really care about your surrounding situation. And that's true for emergencies as well, is that there's, I think, this myth and this idea, Nancy, that if you are under stress, if you don't have adequate calories, you're not going to be able to make milk.
Right. Yeah. And that
Right.
those are common misconceptions. And sometimes even the relief workers
Yes.
labor under those misconceptions. And
Mhm.
so I think what we want people to know is that lactation is a very hardy process.
Right.
And, it is possible to continue breastfeeding, and any breastfeeding can be life-saving in a
Mhm.
situation like that. So,
Yeah.
just because someone's under stress or maybe they don't have, ideal diet or access to water, they still can produce milk.
Right. And as you say, the babies are at most risk because if we start using formula, maybe we don't have clean water, maybe we
Right.
don't have the ability to clean the feeding
Right.
delivery method. And so really thinking about, getting training for these healthcare workers,
Right.
families, relief workers, so that they do understand. And the latest research shows that this is a problem, that
Yes.
these folks, they mean well, but they don't fully understand the process and how to support.
Which is not surprising because I think those of us who work in lactation know that the general population is often very confused about how milk making works. And so relief workers are really no exception.
Right, or they think they know, but they
Yes,
don't actually know.
right,
And so this is a case where, yes, we want to encourage exclusive nursing, but also then maybe wet nursing, induced lactation,
right,
relactation,
right,
because even a bit of milk can be
right.
life-saving for these babies.
That is absolutely true.
Okay. Well, so one of the things that was interesting in the latest research, and we'll have some links to some studies and things on our page for the blog for this podcast, is understanding and addressing specific cultural breastfeeding practices and barriers. I think that we have a tendency here in the United States to charge in and we're going to fix everything without fully understanding. And so, why do you think that people are talking about this particular point?
Well, because every culture has its own set of misconceptions around nursing, and it's important to know what they are when you go in to provide relief help in an emergency so that they can be addressed.
Right. And the literature talks about if you go into a culture that is very pro breastfeeding and everybody nurses, it's so much easier. You just
Absolutely.
need to fix the bumps,
Right.
not go in and like relactate, induce, and things like that. So
Right.
understanding what you're walking into is just
Right.
critical.
But for example, if you went into a culture that was like the US when my mother had me,
Mhm.
most women at that time believed that they just couldn't make enough milk.
Right.
And so that's important to understand.
Right. So addressing those social, psychological kind of
Mhm.
barriers, like I don't
Mhm.
believe I can do it,
Right.
it would be very different. One of the new kind of focuses again is the parent's mental health
Mhm.
during emergencies.
Mhm.
And it can affect breastfeeding negatively by if we have mental health concerns, we know from research people are less likely to nurse. On
Right.
the other hand, what's the counter to this?
Well, the counter is that when nursing is going well, that it actually has a positive effect on mental health. So
Right.
in a situation like an emergency where there is tremendous stress, breastfeeding actually can act as a stress reliever for nursing parents.
And a couple of studies found that it was protective and
Mhm.
that people, when they took, assessments as to how much stress and trauma they felt
Mhm.
from their situation, if they were nursing successfully, it was a protection
Right.
for them. And they felt this less acutely. And
Mhm.
also, we know that if we are nursing and it's going well, we're feeling good about it, we're more likely to continue
Right.
breastfeeding as well.
Right. I guess you could say it's a little bit like an oxytocin therapy.
It
I had that
really is.
experience when my grandfather died and I was nursing a
Mhm.
6-week-old. It was, it was so comforting to me to be nursing my baby at that time when I was grieving. So I think that extends out to many kinds of situations that are stressful.
Right, and you know where your baby's next meal is coming from.
Right.
So that's also very, very reassuring. But that circles back to, again, having the right help and support so that
Mhm.
if there are bumps in the road, families can get adequate and accurate information so they
Right.
can continue. All right, another thing that was interesting in the latest research was they found that baby friendly is important
Mhm.
still in these situations.
Right.
And so, why do you think that would be, Nancy?
Well, I think it's because baby friendly, what it does essentially, I think to me, the magic of baby friendly has always been that it helps bring the hospital staff onto the same page in terms of the messages they're giving to families. And so, if everyone is giving the right messages in terms of getting breastfeeding off to a good start, then you're going to have a lot more babies who are exclusively breastfeeding or doing any breastfeeding, which is going to be a plus in any emergency.
Absolutely. So, those basics of the baby friendly, keeping parents
Mhm.
together,
Mhm.
skin to skin,
Mhm.
avoiding unnecessary supplementation,
Right.
all
Mhm.
of those things are even more important. And they did find a positive impact on
Right.
those practices on breastfeeding rates. Okay, well, then the last thing that I wanted to talk about this is there was a focus in several studies on breastfeeding privacy
Mhm.
and how that is important. And so, Nancy, what do you think about that?
Well, that didn't surprise me when we discussed it before because, there are many, many women who don't necessarily want to expose themselves in front of strangers. And in some cultures, this could be a real big issue.
Mhm.
And so if someone is involved with emergency relief efforts, creating a more private space where mothers can breastfeed, I think can be a huge plus in terms of encouraging, more nursing as opposed to less nursing.
Yeah, and that people were pretty creative. Some created like a breastfeeding tent where
Uh-huh.
families could go and be together
Mhm.
and help support their babies. Because yeah, these refugees, refuge camps, they
Mhm.
can be very chaotic and they can feel
Yes.
very unsafe.
Right.
And
Or if you think about Hurricane Katrina, how everybody was in a giant stadium,
right,
we're like open to view, that can be an issue. So even
right.
privacy screens or something could be helpful.
In some cases, they actually just provided ponchos so that
Mhm.
they could have at least individual privacy.
Yeah,
Because many of these families, they literally are running out the door. They are not having time to think about what to pack and what to take.
right,
Um,
right.
and so, yeah, there were quite a few examples. Again, like individual tents, screens, as you say, big tents where all the ladies could get together, which is a wonderful idea because then they can help provide support to each other.
Right.
But then
Mhm.
as something as simple as a shawl or a poncho to help
Right.
provide that individual privacy. Well, as you say, these are increasing, and it's not just somewhere else. We saw Hurricane
Right.
Katrina. We now have this crisis in Asheville. We have
Right.
another hurricane
Yes.
hurricane toward Florida at this
Yeah.
moment.
As we record this, Hurricane Milton is on its way to the Gulf Coast of Florida.
Down. And so these are going to be happening more and more. So knowing what are options. Now, what about formula distribution? Because
Mhm.
a lot of times we think, oh, let's send them formula. That's going
Right.
to be the answer. So
Right.
talk about, there's some rules about this. There's
There
international.
are, yeah, international organizations have created rules about formula distribution. This is so the formula companies can't use emergencies as an opportunity to market their products. And, depending on where it is and what people's cultural beliefs are, the way formula is distributed, may undermine breastfeeding, which we don't want because formula fed babies are likely to get sick more often and get sick more severely. So we want to make sure that the formula only goes to those babies who absolutely need it. In some countries, for example, they believe that, oh, formula is made by these scientists in the West who obviously produce a product that's better than what they can make with their own bodies. So sometimes it actually gets hoarded, as like treasure and sold in the local market. So what we want to have happen is we want to limit, first of all, distribution to babies who are under 1 year of age. And
Mhm.
we want to make sure that we're not giving it to families who are exclusively breastfeeding, who may think that this is better for their babies than their own milk because it isn't. And it's going to, likely be detrimental to their baby's health rather than a positive. If the formula companies are distributing formula, it needs to be in unbranded containers and
Mhm.
they need to commit to providing it for as long as is needed, not just one shipment and then, have it go away. So these are some of the rules, that are recommended. So yes, this idea of just, blanketing an area with formula is not necessarily going to have a positive impact. It needs to be done carefully. And obviously we want to make sure every baby has what they need, but we don't want to undermine breastfeeding because that also undermines baby's health.
Right. In some places, they encourage the parents to drink it rather than the babies so they can
Yeah.
continue to make healthy milk for their family, for
Well,
the
if there's an abundance of it, that certainly would be an option.
right, because it is nutrition.
Right,
It's just not optimal nutrition, especially for infants.
right.
All right. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us
Mhm.
today and
You're
talking about
welcome.
breastfeeding in emergencies. If you have enjoyed our podcast, you can find more podcasts, all things breastfeeding. And you can find us anywhere that you can find your podcasts on your favorite listening device. And if you are enjoying this podcast, leave a review. That helps other people find us. And yeah, again, thank you so much for listening today.